Shall we round things out with a look at Schumacher then?
I don't know if this was just the luck of the draw, but I suppose it's fitting that the big F1 fan amongst us should end up talking first about this documentary about the legendary German Formula One driver Michael Schumacher. Unfortunately, I now think I'm precisely the worst choice among us to do so because, well, I know most of this already. Produced with the blessing and cooperation of his family, who have been exceptionally private and reserved since the former driver suffered a traumatic brain injury while skiing in December 2013, Hans Bruno Kammerton's Vanessa Neuker and Michael Weck's documentary attempts to create a portrait of a quiet, dedicated family man who also happened to be one of, and arguably the most skilled and committed practitioners that the sport has ever seen. Not too dissimilar in style and tone to Asif Kapadia's Senna documentary, the film begins with Schumacher's astonishing F1 debut in Belgium in 1991, then hops back to the driver's modest beginnings racing on the go-kart circuit managed by his parents, and thereafter follows a largely linear course through his career. His first 2 world championships with Benetton, his rivalries with Damon Hill and Mika Hakkinen, his move to Ferrari, and the cementing of his status as a god to Italian motorsport fans. All this is done with a mix of archive footage and contemporary interviews with his family, his managers and his fellow competitors. All pretty standard stuff in that regard, of course. I enjoyed Schumacher, as much as it left me rather sad given the great man's condition following that tragic skiing accident, a now scarcely believable 8 years ago. But for me, there's not a lot new here. And while I said that much of this wasn't new to me, I did appreciate the insights into his personality away from the track, which helped to paint a better, fuller picture of him as a person, not just a sports person. Similarly, the unknown to me, or at least unremembered by me, stories of him driving less than stellar quality go-karts with used tyres and still beating his competitors, proved a compelling foundation to his work in helping to restore Ferrari to greatness, with his ability to deliver results he had no business being able to deliver with the tools he had at his disposal when he first arrived there. It's all reasonably even-handed, if not exactly warts and all, not shying away from some of Schumacher's less salubrious on-track moments, and features honest appraisals from the likes of Ross Brawn, Michael Schumacher's technical director for a large part of his F1 career. What it lacks, for me, is some emphasis on quite what made him so exceptional, like his superhuman ability to consistently drive a huge number of qualifying level laps in a race, or his impact on the drivers that followed him, Schumacher having been notable for an intense training and fitness regime that was unlike anything the sport had seen before. Before we finish and find out what the 2 people who I presume don't already know all this thought of the film, I will mention one area where my familiarity is actually helpful to me, and a drawback to others. That's a drawback that they don't have it, not that my familiarity is a drawback, let's be clear. And that's knowing whose opinions are worth lending weight to. Of all of the terrible and stupid sports commentators I've had to suffer over the years, and let's be scrupulously fair here, it's nearly all of them.
I know what's coming.
None may be worse than James Allen, a part of ITV's roundly derided coverage when they had the rights to the sport in the UK, and who makes a number of contributions to this documentary. The man is an absolute gimboid, so calibrate yourself appropriately.
So I thought you were going to say Murray Walker.
No. See, by the time Murray Walker finished, he was doing my head in. But so in retrospect, he's at the very worst, the least of many evils. Mm-hmm. But no, like in retrospect, while it was annoying me he was getting things wrong, it's clear now that Murray Walker was he got so caught up in it, his enthusiasm got away from him. Yeah. Whereas every other sports commentator is largely just a moron who's completely oblivious to anything they're seeing or hearing. They're so ignorant. I feel he was different.
Murray Walker is still responsible for, I think, my favourite sports commentator comment of all time, which was, crucially here, emphasis on the word could. They're so close, you could get a cigarette paper between them.
Oh, there's so many good Murrayisms. But no, it's James Allen, because Murray Walker was at least enthusiastic. James Allen was a moron.
Bless old Murray. I'll let me just cut to the chase. I haven't actually watched Schumacher. I was never a great fan. I went through a fairly intense F1 period when I was younger. Never a fan of Schumacher. Well, I tell you what I'll say about Schumacher. Schumacher's no Senna, and you can take that on whichever level you like, whether you're talking about the man or the documentary.
Yes, well, the film's worse, but the man was considerably better, so let's do that and then fight afterwards, yes?
Schumacher got what he deserved. No, tragic set of circumstances. At some point I'll get around to watching this, but yeah, I haven't, so...
I guess I like this a lot because I kind of watched F1 at this particular era when Schumacher was in ascendancy, or at least around. I say I watched it. It'd be more appropriate to say my dad watched it, and because my dad had the remote control,
by osmosis.
Yeah, so this is probably the only era of F1 that I have any familiarity with at all, and so it was nice to get a bit more of a window into Schumacher, because obviously I have no interest in any of the characters involved in it at all, really. So I didn't really know anything that was here. So my recollections of Schumacher was that he was the German robot that crashed into his championship contenders very deliberately. And so it was nice to actually get a bit more context about the man and what he achieved and his family, and actually see him acting like a human being, which a lot of the time, if you're just watching F1 coverage, you might not have got. You may have got a bit more of the kind of more sterile, stereotypical Germanic aspects of his character, whereas this really went into a bit much better detail about the man himself, which is very appreciated. The other obvious question mark was what exactly happened to Schumacher after his accident, and obviously that's been kept up very quiet, and it's tempting to get a lot of conspiracy theories out of that, but of course this film makes it very clear that it's just that he has a very loving family that wants to protect him. And yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's like, obviously, the simplest explanation is indeed the truth. He is not actually being replaced by a robot or anything like that. He's currently
Bob Holness.
He's not Bob Holness. He's not the Queen Mother. He doesn't need his batteries replaced. Not really knowing anything about Schumacher, this is a pretty effective documentary. It certainly gave me a greater appreciation for the man and his achievements and everything that was going on in F1 at the time. So, yeah, it was pretty successful for me. Probably not one, as you mentioned, Drew, really for the true F1 fans who probably know almost all of this already. They'll have seen the interviews where he was coming across with some of his feelings about the Senna crash and things like that. They've probably already seen that kind of stuff, so they won't need that kind of aspects of his character kind of delved into anymore. But for people like myself who didn't really do much more than watch the races under protest when they really wanted to go and play Revenge of Shinobi instead. Just saying. It would be a worthwhile watch for anyone who's in that kind of category. If you're kind of a casual fan of the sport but not of the characters behind it, then this would probably bring you quite a lot of interest into it. At least it's a solid documentary on that basis. So yeah, definitely worth taking a look at if you fall into that category. Yeah.
And like, for a big F1 fan, I've watched it consistently since I was probably 5 years old, and I watch every race. I love it. So there's clearly less there for me. Schumacher would be in a fight for favourite driver of all time for me. Certainly drove for my favourite team. So, imagine I know quite a lot of this already, but even then I still found it interesting and engaging. Mm-hmm. I think it helps. I don't really want to say humanise, because I've never thought that, but certainly for a British audience, they may get more of it, because it always bothered me. And it's maybe something to do with the British character in general, but I remember at the time a lot of people thought that Schumacher was very arrogant, which I never bought. It was more just he didn't buy into that false modesty crap that you get a lot in this country. No, I'm not really that good at this. Like, he was like, what's the point of that? Who's that impressing? What's the point of that? It's like, no, I know I'm good. I'm not going to deny it. But it wasn't arrogance, but I think a lot of people read it like that. So I think in this country, there would be a lot of people, maybe have themselves disabused of that notion and certainly see him as a much more rounded person. And it's just interesting. It's a very successful person in the sport who did a lot of change, did good grammar there, made a lot of changes to his sport. Yeah. Sorry, my thoughts sort of petered out there. Yeah, it's solid. Oh God, yes, I knew I said it was solid. That wasn't the last time I was going to say solid in this episode. It's a really solid film.
Now, did Ferrari, the F1 team, get bought by an energy drink company as well? Because that's my understanding that is now every F1 team is now owned by Red Bull. Is that true? I think that's the case. Because they couldn't have the fag companies own them anymore, so it's now just Red Bull teams, yeah.
Here's the weird, not like the cigarette companies ever owned them, apart from like they owned one team, which is BAR, which is actually now Mercedes.
Benson and Regis.
Yeah.
Did Mercedes buy the fags, or what happened there?
Bus and Hornets is the Benson Hedges sponsored Jordan team did at one point. This is obviously nothing to do with film, but so you mentioned it. Yeah, cigarette companies never owned them apart from BAR, but did sponsor them. Weirdly, Ferrari is still sponsored by Philip Morris, except it's not that. It's this Winnows company, which is some sort of charitable foundation. It's somehow a way to get around that, but nobody knows it's anything to do with cigarettes that sees it, unless you've like read into it a bit. So it's all very weird.
These aren't cigarettes. These are bigarettes. They're entirely legally distinct.
That's when I lost interest in F1 was two key factors: the introduction of the downforce planks and the crackdown on cigarette and alcohol kind of endorsements. I miss the days of the old black and gold Johnny Walker leverage and stuff. But
when Lotus were driving before Lotus after having been Benetton and then Renault, then became Lotus, then became Renault, and are now Alpine, which is Renault's sports car company. Again, Formula One ownership and naming is weird. They did actually go back to the black and red livery. The black and gold livery for a few years while they were Lotus. It was really nice to see.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
That wasn't that long ago.
Yeah,
it was nothing to do with Johnny Walker. John Player. Johnny Walker's.
That's it. Sorry, John Player.
John Player specials. Cigarettes.
Specials.
But no, they did.
I'm confusing my cigarettes with whiskey.
Yeah, which is also black and gold. But it was John Player, not Johnny Walker.
John Player specials.
Now, why haven't the firearm companies got involved in this? Why isn't there a Kalashnikov racing team? I think that would trip off the tongue quite well. No.
Well, there is a team with a Russian driver brings a lot of Russian sponsorship with them, so maybe it's on the cards. I don't know.
Fair enough.